Thank you very much for having invited me for this year's India Foundation Conference. I had the privilege of being invited by the Foundation a little more than a year ago, at a time when the campaign for the last general election was on. The Prime Minister, then as our shadow prime ministerial candidate, had been the chief guest at the conference. And at that time when the conference was being held, obviously there was a mood of larger gloom in the country. And the broad perception was that India had gone indefinitely through a phase of policy paralysis. And I was recollecting from my notes as to what had gone wrong at that time was amongst the analysis that I had an opportunity to present before the audience. And I distinctly remember there was a few point analysis which had been made. And one of the analysis made was that the political model of governance in India had got skewed up because the prime ministerial office itself, which should be the ultimate, the last decision-making body in the country and must have the final say, had been marginalized. And decision-making had transformed itself into outside the government. The obvious impact of this was on policy making. And the drift in policy making was that the last one decade had gone back to those wasted decades of the 1970s and the 80s. I call them the wasted decades because the emphasis during that period, when a large part of the world which was competing with India, China for instance, several other major Asian economies, had decided to liberalize, we had decided to impose tighter controls. And therefore our emphasis during the 1970s had shifted from increased productivity and increased wealth generation into redistribution of existing resources. Now that obsolete model which the world had rejected in the 70s, but we continued to stick to it partly wholly during the 70s and partly even during the 80s. Because of the shift of the power center outside the prime ministerial office, through those power centers was reintroduced in the last decade. And that is eventually what had resulted, amongst other factors, in slowing up the growth process. Decision making was vitiated for various reasons, including corruption. And therefore, there was a huge policy diversion which took place. And policy diversion was that instead of debating how to grow faster, we were still bogged in a debate how natural resources should be distributed. Whether the governments must always have discretions, and those discretions must be exercised for colorable reasons. And investors who benefited from those dubious decisions had suffered. And eventually the system came back hard on them. People forfeited their investments. And India lost its sheen as an investment destination. Our taxation policy had offended many. And our inability to build up a larger consensus amongst others, further paralyzed decision making. It's in the backdrop of that India had to move on. And while moving on, I think it's a tribute to the wisdom of the electorate since the last conclave of India Foundation was held, that the electorate decided to give a decisive mandate. After 30 years, India got a single party majority government, though we are still a coalition government and will probably continue to be one. But the internal pressures of government on decision making don't exist. The Prime Minister unquestionably has the last word, and no government, no finance minister can ever implement a series of changes and reforms, or any other minister for that matter, till has the full backing of the Prime Minister. And what is extremely important is the direction, even in otherwise adverse global situations, that the Indian economy has to take. And it doesn't require a great analysis or even greater academic wisdom to decide as to what direction we have to take. Facts are crystal clear. You have India's agricultural sector, very largely dependent on rain. Our rain-fed area is huge, and therefore always continues to be fragile. Its fragility is added by the fact that for 15% of our income, 55% of our population depends on it. And therefore there is a need to restructure the Indian model, the structural model, where lesser number of people have to be employed in that agriculture and more will have to be diverted into other sectors of the economy. And in order to divert more people into other sectors of the economy, you will need a fast growing services sector. Our services sector is reasonably fast growing. You need more urban centers, more suburban centers, which eventually do act as important engines of growth. And you'll need a very vibrant manufacturing sector. And therefore, over the next few decades, you'll have a large influx of population otherwise employed in agriculture coming into these sectors. And these sectors really must have the capacity to absorb. It's here that we must also be clear that large industry has a capacity, but somewhat a limited capacity to absorb them. It's facing its own challenges. And therefore, you'll have to encourage, for the purposes of generating employment, for the purposes of getting this workforce into these segments, a large number of small entrepreneurs all over the country. Jayant was just now mentioning the banking reforms package that we have implemented. And one of the reasons why we had to implement, besides internal issues of the government, where we needed to professionalize the management of the banks, where we needed to have the top managers who are completely selected for professional considerations and not otherwise, where you need to recapitalize the bank to feed some economic strength into them. Their NPAs are also on account of several factors, part of which are also attributable to external factors. The steel NPAs are due to external factors. We are trying to rectify them. The infrastructure and the highway NPAs are substantially due to our internal factors, and therefore we are realizing the limitations of the private sector when there was a slow growing economy, and therefore the public investment has picked up much larger, as Jayant was just now mentioning. And we are trying, still grappling with how to deal with the power sector once. But most of these are with the large industry. And therefore, their ability to kickstart Indian economy at this stage is tied up by several limitations. Of course, in the spheres they are doing well, they have an important role to play. And therefore, it's a large amount of public investment. It's encouraging foreign direct investment. And it's also diverting a large part of our banking resources into the unorganized sector, into the small and medium enterprises who have a huge capacity at employment generation. And therefore, for any architecture of Indian growth, along with a large public investment, the private investment as and when it picks up, foreign direct investment, we'll also need a lot of resource diversion to skill India and to make these people in the unorganized sector, the small and the medium enterprises, also to start generating jobs. Kickstarting our manufacturing sector and its growth rate improving further, I think is one of the greatest challenges to the Indian economy today. If we can handle that problem, its ability to absorb a number of people coming from rural India and adding to India's growth story is going to be much larger. Fortunately, the service sector in India has been doing well. It's always in the vicinity of a double-digit growth. And the growth in the other sectors is going to directly impact on it. It's for this reason that we've now decided our areas of the growth of architecture to concentrate first instance even on agriculture. So the soil health card, our emphasis on rural infrastructure, the 50,000 crores to be spent on the irrigation schemes. And some of the states have done exceedingly well. I must compliment the state of Andhra Pradesh yesterday, which in creating the river grid yesterday, in a period of 165 days since the new government took over, can actually change the face of a number of those drought affected areas which have been conventional in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh has done it with great ease and capacity, and that's reflected in almost a 20% growth in agriculture as far as Madhya Pradesh is concerned on an average in the last few years. And that 20% growth in agriculture is now impacting on other sectors because the purchasing power is going up, the rural infrastructure is improving, the roads are doing better, important cities are coming up in the state, and that's an impact which you can see. So 3 days ago when the World Bank gave the state ratings, it's the new age states. Gujarat was always expected to do well. But what was most remarkable was that the tribal dominated states of Chhattisgarh, Odisha and Jharkhand had moved amongst the first 6. Which actually indicates that these states which have a large number of poor people, a very large number of tribals, but have a rich mineral resource, are now easing their processes and concentrating on value addition so that jobs can be created within those states, so infrastructure can be better, power projects can be much better. And therefore, that seems to be a silver lining. Therefore, it's agriculture and the increased investment in rural agriculture and irrigation, rural infrastructure and irrigation, which is one part of the priorities as far as the government is concerned. To impact on infrastructure, which will have a direct link to the manufacturing sector, this year a very large number of a large amount of resource, and we've used the reduction in the oil prices globally, and that has actually had a great emphasis in the budgetary shift. So the percentage of subsidies as a part of the GDP itself has declined, and that rationalization has enabled us to shift a large part of our resource into infrastructure. So the road sector is building up, the railways are looking up with a lot more money in their pocket, the rural roads are going to do better. We need to move a little faster as far as seaports are concerned, and even look at the existing structure of the management through the trust system which is currently on. And these are areas which we really have to look at. In order to add to that manufacturing sector, we've been conscious of the fact that there is a need to attract investment. So when there are pressures on domestic investment, you look at public investment, you look at foreign direct investment, which has increased substantially in the last 1 year. Because without investment, there's going to be no economic activity or no additional economic activity. Because investment is always, from whichever source it comes, an important additionality of resource. After doing that, I think there are two things which are still work in progress. The first work in progress is the easing of doing businesses. I'm glad the state rankings have now come up so that states start competing with each other. Today, you don't have any section of the economy which is saying, or the industry which is saying, that I'm being harassed and I'm not being given permissions. Those procedures have been substantially rationalized. But then the entire regulatory system and other systems have to prepare themselves much faster for this change. Our taxation systems, our pending disputes. Now, a number of them have been put to rest, and we are trying over the next few days itself so that many others can be put to sleep, either by a judicial resolution or by an executive resolution. Natural resources, we've rationalized the system of allocations, we've done away with the controversies. There are many other reforms which we have in the pipeline. The GST reform is stuck because of political reasons. The bankruptcy code, the dispute resolution in major contracts, expeditious arbitration procedures, a public procurement laws, and these are all which we've been trying to put on track. In a situation where there is turmoil almost by the day as far as global markets are concerned, we are trying to make the fundamentals of our own economy a little sound, so that our own ability to resist these changes can substantially improve. And once we are able to walk on this growth track, I'm quite certain the architecture for growth for India would be settled strong and deep. Thank you very much.